Hello and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor video. This time I'm going to be talking about periodic effects, and that's your hots and dots and that kind of thing. Now this is going to be a really meaty video that's just kind of full of a lot of details and things like that. So I'm going to try to go just a little bit more slower and explain things. So yeah, it's definitely something that's worth listening to, though, because there are a lot of gameplay implications here, and it's stuff that if, you know, no matter what part of the game you're doing, it's probably worth you being aware of these changes. Anyway, so let's get into the first topic, which is snapshotting. So currently we're in the situation now where a lot of our dots snapshot. This means that the stats of the full duration of your damage over time spell are based off your character's current stats at the instant that you cast it. So if you're a warlock and then you casted corruption right after you popped all of your cooldowns, then your corruption would continue to do damage based off the level of stats you had because of your buffs, even after the point where those buffs had expired. Now that was a bit interesting because it led to some gameplay that Blizzard have said they think was good, but then other things which they think was bad. And basically it encourages you to refresh your dots when your stats are high, so perhaps when a trinket procs, it's actually going to be worth refreshing a dot. Now, knowing when to do this normally takes a great degree of skill, but the downside is that the majority of people can't realistically do this themselves, and because of that, people have just made add-ons which tell you when to hit a button, and that's really what it's boiled down to. So that's been a little bit of an issue. Blizzard generally don't like it when add-ons end up playing a part of the game for you, and it does literally just turn into, hey, my add-on did some maths, you should refresh now, hit the button. So that's a little bit of an issue in their mind. Also, they said that it isn't really intuitive in their opinion, the way that the benefits of a buff can be there after the buff has expired. Which I think does make a bit of sense. But then more importantly, their biggest issue is that the benefits of using Snapshot correctly are so large that they lead to a really large DPS gain that is causing major balance problems with some classes. Basically, people who use snapshotting primarily via add-ons do a lot more damage than is intended, and if they were to bounce around people doing that amount of DPS, then it would lead to just this giant divergence in terms of the amount of damage the people do who do and then don't take care of snapshotting. So when you go into a fight and say, I don't know, let's just pick a random class, a warlock, right? The warlock that uses snapshotting really well is just going to perform other warlock, outperform them so much that it leads to balance problems, and it sort of forces in this form of gameplay that they don't particularly like. So they've decided it isn't really good on the whole, and what they're going to do is make it so that the vast majority of dots and hots that currently snapshot will no longer continue to do so. Now there are a few exceptions. Basically, the only exceptions are the ones that do damage based on a percentage of a previous ability's damage, as they inherently act as a delayed damage multiplier to those abilities. So, just to give you an example, this applies to, say, Blackout Kick if you're a Whirlwind Monk, and then your Fireballs and Ignites if you are a Fire Mage. And so that's one thing. Then also temporary effects which buff the damage or healing of other spells will continue to snapshot as it does make sense. So as an example, if you are a shaman and you use Unleash Flame, which by the way is an ability that increases the damage of your next fire spell, and then you were to use some sort of, I don't know, fire dot, then that fire dot would continue, of course, to benefit from that increased damage during its entire lifetime. So basically, where it makes a lot of sense for snapshotting to happen, it does happen, but in these other instances, it will not. I'd imagine, though, that they are going to make sure that, when there's times when gameplay really does benefit from snapshotting, that they will kind of keep that there. And we already see that with, say, that Fire Mage stuff they were talking about in the patch notes. And I do believe that on Twitter they said something about a Druid spec retaining some form of snapshotting. Not 100% sure, but basically the TLDR is that the vast majority of abilities will dynamically recalculate their damage, healing, crit, etc. with every single tick based on the player's current stats at the time of that tick. So the minute your heroism falls off, then your dot is not going to stop benefiting from heroism, because that makes sense, because heroism isn't there anymore. So yeah, that's the lowdown with that. Sorry if that was a little bit hard to follow. I try to go through it a bit slower. It's, yeah, I guess it can be confusing, but I think overall it does make a good degree of sense. I'll talk more about my own opinions of all these changes later on in the video though. Okay, so they're also changing up the effect of Haste on damage over time and heal over time spells. Basically, Haste currently affects the tick rate of periodic effects, and the duration of a periodic effect is actually rounded to a whole number of ticks. This is mainly done just so it preserves the original duration of a spell. Now this was kind of problematic because it created a breakpoint where having a certain amount of haste meant that you'd get an extra tick out of your ability, which meant that for some people, and I guess specifically in some classes, they were just gearing to hit a certain number of haste. And overall, Blizzard think that this was pretty tedious, and it wasn't really a fun way of doing gear. So now they're going to calculate the effect of haste on tick time dynamically as the spell kind of moves forward, meaning that the number of ticks will scale in a smooth manner with haste and that kind of thing, and it'll just basically remove all those haste breakpoints, and things will be fine. Honestly, that's not something I've really bothered to read into in the past. Of course, I've known about snapshotting, you nearly have to, being a raider these days, but that haste stuff, honestly, I was completely, I knew it was a thing, but I was mainly oblivious to it. Okay, so finally, we actually have one of the more interesting changes. So what they're going to do is make it so that dots refresh just a little bit differently. Currently though, for most damage over time spells, and this of course probably applies to heal over times as well, but you can refresh them within their last or second to last tick without any loss in damage. Basically it adds it all up and you're fine. But currently Warlocks have a passive where they can refresh a dot that is under halfway through its duration without wasting that second half of its duration. Now the way I read this is that basically if you have a 20-second dot and then you've refreshed it 5 seconds from the end of its duration, then you would get a new 25-second dot, which means that the final 5 seconds of your original application were not lost. So essentially what they like the flexibility that this system added to the game. So what they've decided to do is just roll out to all the other classes, but to ensure that it's balanced and doesn't affect gameplay too much, I suppose, they're going to drop that effect down to 30%. This means that recasting a dot or hot on a target will now extend the effect up to 130% of its normal duration. So that's certainly an interesting change, and you know what, that's all the changes done. Let's just talk about my opinions. So first of all, snapshotting. Well, I can see that the problem they had, and it more in terms of gameplay, it didn't feel like using a real class mechanic in a lot of cases, and it just felt like using a technicality, which I guess just breaks game immersion. It sort of breaks just the idea of your character and your spells being the thing that you deal with, not these little behind the hood intricacies of how the game works. So that's probably just one of the main issues that they also had there in terms of the design. Though I do feel that it, in some cases, provided some really nice gameplay, but then of course when it got to the point of it just being an add-on doing all the work, then it was kind of bad. Because you don't want to develop your game with other people's add-ons in mind. You want to develop a great game and then allow add-ons to enhance that, but certainly not just work around a skill cap or something like that. So overall, I think that toning down and snapshotting is probably a really good thing, providing that some of the specific instances where snapshotting was a really good class mechanic still remain. So basically those examples that they had back there. And yeah, we'll just have to see how this rolls out specifically. This is alpha, we don't know exactly, so yeah, we're just going to have to wait and see on that one, honestly. Okay, so next for the whole haste thing, well, I think that this was just bad because it was basically another arbitrary number that you had to work around, so I'm glad it's gone. I don't think that was a particularly fun thing, or at least it didn't sound fun to me. In general, you don't want to just have some arbitrary numbers breakpoint where everyone has to gear towards. It's not fun, it's not interesting. Now on this whole extension thing, well, this is actually a sizable gameplay change. Does it make it easier to play your class optimally? Yeah, perhaps. I think. I do like the flexibility though, because having that few seconds leeway at the end could allow some high-end players to do some sort of trickery with lining up their ability cooldowns and maybe squeezing some extra abilities in over the fight. We will have this kind of window in which we can reset, but will it always be optimal to refresh as soon as we hit that 30%? I don't know. Could it end up being, like, say, with a Ret Paladin, where you actually shouldn't use your Templar's Verdict as soon as you get 3 Holy Power, as delaying it until you have 5 power actually lines up a little bit better with your Crusader Strike, Exorcism, and Judgment cooldowns, so that over an entire fight you can actually get additional abilities in, while still using all the Holy Power that you generate? Could things like that happen to other classes? And what is going to be the overarching effect of this extra window? I don't know. I have no idea. It's certainly going to be something that a lot of playtesting will find out, though, in the alpha or beta, whenever the hell that comes out. And speaking of that, I think it's probably going to be the next, like, maybe week or two, maybe, something like that. Anyway, that's basically it for the video. Lots of changes. It's a pretty meaty video. Maybe you'll have to have another listen over it or something like that. I did do what I could just to make sure it was all understandable, but I think that overall, these changes should be pretty decent in theory, but we need to just get some playtesting in to ensure that Blizzard don't just mess it up. Anyway, that's it for the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.